we've got to keep our heads clear, and we've got to remember to campaign on our key messages. And our key messages will be relevant during the election campaign, and there'll be our 4 cards on the table on the 7th of May if we have to enter into discussions with the third party, which may be the Labour Party on this occasion. The first one of those, and you're going to be very familiar with these hopefully by now, but by the end of the campaign, you and everyone else in Bristol West is going to be very familiar with these 4 pledges. The first one is that we want to inject more fairness back into society. One of the sad things that has happened in the last 13 years of this Labour government is that the gap in between the rich and the poor has actually widened. Now, I always used to rather perhaps naively believe that the Labour Party was a socially progressive party, that at the core of its mission, in its heart in politics, was to raise people out of poverty and perhaps achieve some of that by taking some of the inherited wealth and opportunity away from those at the top. But in the last 13 years, that gap has actually widened and not narrowed. It's a real squandered opportunity. So the number one pledge that we are making in this election is to make our taxation system much fairer. The biggest way that most people get their money is through work or through their pension when they've left work. Yet you're taxed very heavily on that income. So our first pledge is that the first £10,000 of your income shall be free of income tax completely. This is a revolutionary proposal in the 200-year history of income tax. And it's an easy thing to say, perhaps, and the other parties will be saying it's an easy pledge, it's an uncosted pledge, but it is costed. It's going to be paid for by a levy on those who own houses worth more than £2 million. There may actually be some of those in Bristol West. It's going to be paid for by tightening up some of the reliefs that people get in the taxation system, for instance, for their pension contributions. Overall, it's neutral, but the effect of it is for those who are on modest and low incomes to have much more of their own income, whether it's in work or in retirement, to spend as they see fit. The second one is very dear to me as well, and that's helping children who come from a disadvantaged background to make the most of the opportunity that education ought to be giving to them. Most of you know that my background is not typical as a Member of Parliament. Parliament is stuffed full of people whose parents have achieved well, who went to good schools. I don't come from that background. I come from a family where both of my parents left school without any qualifications, and I was the first person to go to university, and I was on free school meals, or dinner tickets, as we actually used to call them, when I was in school. The biggest gap in educational attainment in our country, still after, again, 13 years of a supposedly progressive Labour government, is in between those whose parents have done well at school and those who come from a poor background. And that gap has not been narrowed. We want to make sure that every school that has pupils who are on free school meals or some other measurement of poverty get an extra £2,500 per child in order to spend within their school budget on one-to-one tuition, because that could make a huge difference. If a child doesn't have the support of their parents, doesn't have books at the home, isn't taken to the library, isn't encouraged out of school, somebody else has to encourage them. And that can only be done in the school itself. So more one-to-one tuition or smaller class sizes will make an enormous difference to opportunity in our country, so that people from whatever their background are able to leave school with qualifications, are able to go on to college, are able to go into an apprenticeship, are able to storm the heights of the professions, whether it's in the media or the judiciary or in politics for that matter, which are currently closed to them. The third thing that we want to pledge is a completely different sort of economy in the future. We need to change our economy in two ways. First of all, we need to, and both of them are about sustainability. First of all, we need a new green economy in the future. We've got some ambitious climate change targets that we have to meet by 2020. But if we're going to meet those, we have to have young people with the skills in maths and engineering in order to build those wind turbines, to build the Severn barrage, to have the underwater turbines, whatever it takes, so that we have a low carbon economy by 2020. We also need to have a financially sustainable new model of doing business in this country, more encouragement for social enterprise and responsible lending by the banks. The fourth fourth card on the table for the election and for what comes afterwards, is fair politics. Now, all of us, or many of us, will have talked about proportional representation, will have talked about controlling the House of Commons, will have talked about driving big money out of politics for a very long time. And usually people are pretty bored by it, and the media certainly don't care about it. I'm going to take a risk and mention MPs' expenses. At some points last year, it was quite a miserable time to be a member of Parliament and to go to a pub with my godchildren. The father of my godchildren is here today, and for someone to come up to me in a pub and say, "I hope that's not on expenses." Politics has got a bad reputation, but why has it got a bad reputation? It's got a bad reputation because too many members of the House of Commons feel that they've never had to look over their shoulder at the electorate, never have to worry about scrutiny from their electorate because they're in safe seats. We know the House of Lords has got safe seats, the ultimate safe seats of life membership or hereditary membership. There are about a third of the House of Commons that effectively are life MPs. And a fair voting system does away with that completely. And we also need to make sure that big money is driven out of politics so we're all competing on an even keel.